Nearly 4 years of deadly conflict in Yemen is showing no signs of letting up. It's often called the forgotten war because most of the world's attention has been focused on Syria. Yet fighting and famine has killed tens of thousands of people there, and 14 million more are relying on humanitarian aid and are at risk of famine. Ubai Shabander brings us a story of two hungry children struggling to stay alive.
This is what starvation does to a child's body. The war in Yemen has been raging for 3 long years, and it has hit the young hard.
He doesn't suffer from any sickness. He suffers from malnutrition due to the terrible humanitarian conditions here and the severe poverty they are living in.
The UN says that up to 14 million people are at risk of famine in Yemen, many of them children. The battle raging around the country's main port of entry for food and medicine is making life difficult for children like Awad from the besieged city of Taz.
We came here to look after our family. Our father is sick. He has a spinal disorder. He cannot move. We decided to leave home so that we can find work and help our family.
Starvation is an immensely painful way to die. Vital organ functions slow down and eventually stop. The doubling of the cost of food since the start of the war forced Ghazi and his brother to leave home to survive.
In the village, we suffered from great poverty. I had to leave and come here to the city to look for work and take care and feed my family.
Now, Ghazi is getting treatment in this medical facility run by a charity. But for hundreds of thousands of other children, their suffering will continue as long as the war goes on. Ubai Shabander, TRT World.
Those images of starving children can be difficult to look at, but it's so important their story is heard. But those telling their stories are increasingly at risk as journalists come under attack from both sides. They're often under threat from kidnappings or are killed by raids and missile strikes. Joining me now is Obaida Hitto, one of the journalists of our Middle East desk, who helps make sure those stories are told. Obaida, Houthi leaders call for journalists to be targeted, deeming them more dangerous than fighters. It's often too dangerous for us to send our own reporters there, so how do we get this information?
So on the Middle East desk, we are always in contact with sources in Yemen where the news is happening. We get information regularly through the agencies and through other sources, but when you have somebody on the ground, it makes it a bit different. They send you information with more quality, more accuracy, and more speed. So when we have breaking news, we immediately go to them, we ask them to give us the latest lines, to give us all the updates, to tell us what's going on. And then, for example, when we have long-term conflicts like what's been going on in Yemen, they help us by telling us stories that you don't usually get from the agencies and from the breaking news. So we talk to them about the different stories that are going on. And we ask them to conduct interviews and to shoot footage and to send it back to us.
Now, Saudi-led coalition airstrikes have killed more than 120 journalists in over 3 years. How dangerous is it for our fixers and sources that you mentioned on the ground?
So what I want to say here is that we can't actually guarantee the safety of our journalists in any way. We don't actually provide them with any kind of equipment or training. They do this out of their own accord. More often than not, these are people living in a conflict zone and have been cut off from their normal forms or means of living, and so they're looking for a new way or maybe a different way of making a living, and this is one of the ways that they can do that. But I should say that also we warn them, we ask them, we tell them that if it's dangerous for you to go and get the story or to shoot this footage, please don't do it. But I can't actually control that sitting here in the newsroom. But actually, they are facing a lot of danger. They're facing, checkpoints. They're facing actual combat zones. They're facing, different kinds of problems on the road, traveling from place to place to collect, images for a story. So they're facing a lot of challenges. It's not completely safe for them. And like you mentioned, there are groups that don't like journalists, going around and taking videos and sending it out of the country.
So what's an important story that you've helped tell?
Recently, we got a story from one of our fixers in Yemen about a young man. His name is Ahmed, and he was climbing up to the top of the mountain where he stayed regularly for hours and hours on end. And basically, he was warning his fellow Yemeni citizens in Taz, which is blockaded currently by Houthi forces, whenever there was incoming airstrikes or artillery strikes. So at the top of this mountain, he can see the other tops of the mountains, and he can see the entire city of Taz in the valley. And whenever he hears or sees any kind of attack coming towards the city, he blows in a big plastic horn and makes a big noise, and people, can go to safety. And this was a really interesting story about how people are trying to adjust, to this ongoing conflict in a very unique way. And the person who got us this story actually had to go with Ahmed up to the mountain and sit with him for a while. And while they were shooting, we actually heard artillery strikes going on. And so we really got a unique story from the ground, from the front lines, which helps us tell the bigger story about the conflict in Yemen.
So Ahmed was the lookout.
Yeah, Ahmed is basically a lookout at the top of the mountain and warning his fellow Yemenis whenever they were in danger.
Incredible. Thanks, Obaida.
Yeah, thanks, Adil.